today is I want to talk about what happens when your Channukah lights go out. It's Channukah tomorrow night. Can you believe it? Tomorrow night is Channukah. How are we sitting down and not jumping around with excitement? Tomorrow night, Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll have the honor of celebrating Channukah. And what happens if, everything is ready, we set up our Chanukiah, and then we light it, and then we're in the middle of a Ma'al store, and then it all blows out. What do we do? That's the question I would like to discuss together. We'd like to discuss that question and then discuss the halachic, the reason for this particular halakha of what happens when the Channukah lights go out. But I want to preface our discussion by talking about Channukah lights in general and contrasting Channukah lights with Shabbat lights. We have Channukah candles and Shabbat candles. And when you look at the flames, they look quite similar. But really, there are a few very important differences between Shabbat candles and Channukah candles. I want to spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll talk about what happens when Channukah lights go out. Okay, so first of all, Channukah lights, let's start with Shabbat lights, Shabbat candles. So Shabbat candles are lit for the home. The reason why I like Shabbat candles is because I want my home to have more light. I want to enjoy the Shabbat candles. In fact, the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Shabbat about all different types of flammable materials. Some you can use for Shabbat candles and some you can't use for Shabbat candles. And really one of the criteria is I want to have a beautiful flame. I want to add to my Oneg Shabbat through beautiful Shabbat candles. Shabbat lights. Some people use candles, some people use oil, but for some reason we call them Shabbat candles. So I'm going to stick with that. I mean wax candles, but it could be something else. Anyway. So the Shabbos is I light them for inside the home. But Channukah, I light my candles for outside the home. In fact, as you may know, when I light my Channukah candles, ideally I would light them outside of my home. Originally, that's where everybody would light their Channukah lights, because it's not about me, it's about you seeing them. I want the world to see my Channukah candles. Unfortunately, through generations of exile, it became dangerous and people were wary of putting my Channukah candles outside the house, and therefore people brought them into the home. One of the exciting things, in brackets then, about the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel through Medinat Yisrael is that the Chanukiah that was originally outside and came inside because we were scared, is now coming back outside again. We're able to, with great joy, light our Chanukiyot outside the home. In fact, if you walk around, and I strongly recommend you do this, in the old city and in Nachlaot and other neighborhoods, sometimes people have on the outside of their homes, on the stone, they've edged out a space for the Chanukiyah inside the wall of their home on the outside, which is absolutely beautiful. Separately, painfully, this particular year, unfortunately, I was reading an Jewish English newspaper where there have been restrictions. They're worried about what might happen if there was a big Chanukiah in some towns in England, and therefore it's a terrible thing. Some of the Chanukiyot are, they want to cancel them because they're worried about how the neighbors might react, which is really it makes this particular Channukah, especially with what's going on down south and up north, it tinges it a little bit with sadness. But in general, this idea of how the Chanukiah that was inside has gone outside is really beautiful. So Channukah is about showing you, and Shabbat is about showing me. My Channukah, my Shabbat candles, and that's really is all about me. I want to see my Shabbat candles. I want to use them. I want to enhance my Shabbat table with the Shabbos candles. But the Channukah lights, we're not supposed to use the light. It's for me to put as a sign for you to look at. But it's not something for me to use. Now, the Shulchan Aruch has a very interesting halacha, and this is a nice way to contrast the two types of candles. Let's say somebody, this coming Shabbat, only has enough money to light either Shabbat candles or Chanukah candles. Which one would they light?
Shabbat, because it's regular.
Oh, you're such a halachist. Thank you, Zachariah. The answer is Shabbat, exactly. Shabbat comes first. Rabbi Sachs explains, I mean, you're right, halachically. Tadir v'she'in lo tadir, but I'm not sure if this is an example of that. Anyway, Rabbi Sachs explains that the purpose of Shabbat candles are to bring peace into the home, shalom bayit, for me to enhance my Shabbat. And the purpose of the Chanukah candles is to commemorate our victory in war. So if I have to choose between bringing peace or commemorating a war, so I'm going to choose the peace in the home, because meaning Shabbat candles are for me, my Chanukah candles are for you. So I'm going to focus on me before I focus, meaning on what I need before I go to you. Okay, so far on the difference between Shabbos candles and Chanukah candles, they couldn't really be very different. I mean, they couldn't be any more different, other than the fact they're both candles. But the purpose and the essence and the idea of them couldn't be more different between Shabbat and Chanukah. Okay, now let's go to the Gemara. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Shabbat. You know, there's like 2 dapim in Masechet, 2 pages of the Gemara in Shabbat. The second parak of Masechet Shabbat is all about the oils that were used to light Shabbos candles. If any of you are Ashkenazim, you might be familiar. We say this parak of Mishnah on Friday night. Bameh madlikin uvamein madlikin. What can you light Shabbos candles with? What can you not light them with? Anyway, in the context of Shabbos candles, we then move on to Chanukah candles on the Gemara on those Mishnayot. So the Gemara says like this in source number 1. Amrila, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav, Petilot ushmanim she'amru chachamim, ein madlikin bahem b'Shabbat, madlikin bahem b'Chanukah. All of those types of lights that you are not allowed to use to light on Shabbat, you are allowed to use to light those on Chanukah. You follow? Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbat, whether it's during the week or whether it's on Shabbat. So there's no limitations on what type of light I can use to light my Chanukah lights. You know, we were talking earlier about Chassidut. So I heard like this sweet Chassidish interpretation as saying that there's some Jews who are like a clean, beautiful flame, like an olive oil. You know, when you have an olive oil container and then you put a little bit of wick in it, and then you have this beautiful flame, and then you have like, I mean, you've ever seen when like burning tar or something like that, and there's tons of soot and smoke, and that's the sort of fire that you couldn't use for Shabbat, but you could use it on Chanukah. So you're saying there's different types of people. There's people that, like, you know, for Shabbat, you have to be sort of, like a bit more clean, a bit more proper, a bit more respectable. But on Chanukah, everyone is welcome. On Chanukah, it doesn't matter who you are. Anyone is eligible to be a Chanukah light. You hear that? That's okay. So that's the first bit of the Gemara. Then Gemara continues. Omer Rabbi Yira, my time into Rav. So why is it that you can use anything? So he says something very interesting. He's got this very interesting rule. Kavta, if the light went out, ein zakukla, which means if the light went out, ein zakukla, you don't need it, which means you don't need to relight it. Va'asur lishtamesh le'ora, and you can't benefit from the light of the Chanukiah. So if my Chanukah lights go out, I have no requirement to relight them. Meaning, like the light afterwards is almost irrelevant. That's not the right word, but it's not the focus. The most important aspect of Chanukah light is my act of lighting the Chanukah light. Whether it stayed lit or not is not, that's really not up to me. Now, you wouldn't be allowed to go in the middle of a hurricane and then put your Channukah outside and then light it, and then, oh my gosh, it went out. Meaning, it has to be set up to light. But as you know, even with the best intentions, you could set it up to light, and then in the last minute, it may not remain lit. But, if you set it up for disaster, then obviously that would be a problem. Okay, that is the Gemara. The Gemara says, Kavta ein zakuk la. Clear? Now, what's interesting, we're going to see how this concept goes into the Rambam and then into the Shulchan Aruch, which really means it's how we rule nowadays. The Rambam says, based on the Gemara that we just read, Hidlika, if somebody lit their Channukah candles, v'kavta, and then it went out, their Channukah candles, eino zakud lahadlika pa'am acheret. You're not required to relight the Channukah candles. That is the Rambam, and likewise in the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, Hadlaka osa mitzvah. The mitzvah is to light. Lefichach im kavta, if the Channukah lights went out, kodem sha'avar zamana, if it went out before they're supposed to be lit for half an hour after nightfall. So if they went out before that time period had elapsed, eino zakukla, don't worry. Vafilu kavta be'erev Shabbat, kodem kabbalat Shabbat. If you lit on a Friday afternoon, but you haven't yet brought in Shabbat, even then, I could light it. It's still Friday afternoon. Eino zakukla. Meaning, I think what he's telling us, don't think that the reason why you don't light it is because we're worried you might break Shabbat unintentionally. That's not the reason. There's a deeper reason. It's not that sometimes the rabbis, a bit like we don't blow a shofar on Shabbat, or we don't shake arba minim on Shabbat. We're worried that if there's certain things that you might do on Shabbat, you might come to transgress Shabbat by mistake. So say, once you let it, leave it. So the Shulchan Aruch wants to explain, no, it's not a concern that if I lit it, I'm worried if it's going to go out, but the essence of the mitzvah is only about the lighting. It's only about the lighting. If it stays lit, obviously, that is what we want, but it's not essential. Is that clear to everyone? I feel a bit guilty talking about this week. I'll tell you why. Last week, if you remember, we looked at the Sfat Emet, and he spoke about the beauty of the Channukah lights. Do you remember how Channukah was only established a year later? I mean, we have this beautiful story. It was supposed to light for 1 day, and it ended, the Channukah light stayed lit for 8 days, right? But on that 8th day, or even on the 9th day, or even the 10th day, that wasn't a time that the rabbis got together and said, something amazing has just happened, let's turn it into a chag. Nothing happened that year. The following year, on the 25th of Kislev, when the Cohn went to light the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, and he saw this flame that he hadn't seen before, he realized that the light that was discovered, or that they saw the previous year, was something miraculous, and it needs to be commemorated every year, and therefore it was only the second year that the festival was created. And then the Baal Sfat Emet tells us that when we light our Channukah light, we tap into the same flame that the Kohen Gadol saw. Isn't that a beautiful idea? Anyway, so I feel a bit reluctant because I'm talking about, we spent the whole of last week talking about how beautiful it is to look at the flame, the beautiful flame of your Channukah. And now we're saying just now that if it goes out, you're allowed to leave it. You follow? But, okay, we'll live with that. Okay, so we're going to look at two answers to why it is the hadlaka that matters, and not why it is the lighting and not the being lit that is important. The first approach is from the Shemi Shmuel, Rav Shmuel Borshin of Sokachov, Idan. This is such a beautiful continuation of our discussion. It's excellent. Okay, so we're gonna the Shemi Shmuel explains that this ruling, which is counterintuitive, because the whole point is, the Neirot Akadoshim, these holy candles, and then they get blown out, and then we just leave them. It's sort of counterintuitive to what I might expect. So let's look. The Shemi Shmuel is this beautiful idea that really this teaching is the essence of the difference between us and the Yevanim. It's an ideological position to teach us something unique about Channukah. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, let's look at the Shem Shmuel in source number 4. Yesh Litbonen, let's consider. Bahar de Hilchata, Kavta in Zakukla. We say that, as we saw in the Gemara and then subsequently in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, if the light goes out, you don't need to relight it. We don't see that in any other mitzvah. In every mitzvah, the point is to do the mitzvah. You follow here, it's a bit like, it seems a bit like saying Borei Piya'etz and then not eating the apple. You know what I mean? It's so counterintuitive. I just want to add one more thing before we get too carried away. In this, you're not required to relight it. But I have to tell you from my own personal oil lighting experience, we in our family do always try to relight them, just because that's the whole point. But we're not required to. You follow? But you're not forbidden. You've done everything you need to do. Once it's lit, you're done. You follow? You may want it to remain lit because it's Channukah and it looks a bit odd to have this beautiful Channukah and light candle number 1 and 4 are lit and all the others are empty. You follow? So you're not required to. We're talking halachically, but in practice, I would suggest that you do. Okay, look at this. V'nir'ah, it seems to me, says the Shem Shmuel, tihinei yadua. Everyone knows, ayuvanim hayu mitnagdim biyoter lemitzvot ma'asiyot. They, the Greeks, when they say the Greeks, I think they weren't actually Greek, but they were original. I think Greece divides up into various different communities. Huh?
It's more like Alexander the Great.
Yes.
Alexander Macedonian.
Nachon.
His generals divided his army into 4. So I think the one that were complaining about this were Seleucids.
Thank you.
The way one of my rabbis explains it, the war was more of a civil war, and it was between emancipated how you call it, city population who went in with the occupier, and peasant-like population that was following the halacha.
Yes.
So the priesthood or the city population that went against halacha and wasn't doing, then they called the Seleucid to. So at first it wasn't between Seleucid and local population here at all. That's the explanation.
Yes, I've heard that too. Yeah, we tend to speak about the Jews against the Greeks, but I think it's not quite that simple. I think that you're quite right. There was something about after Alexander the Great, there was some sort of division, and it is according to one. It is one of the sorts of communities.
It started all that at that time that there were a lot of Jews that were called Alexander, because Alexander Macedonian is one of the rare conquerors that when he came to the land of Israel, he didn't destroy anything, and then that's why it was even more credits.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
As a follow-up,
I'm happy Daniel's here, people. What would we have done?
I'm sorry.
You are such a asset. Thank you. Continue, please. No. What were you going to say? What was the second point?
Well, that's why, following like when Alexander, a lot of the Jews here Hellenized themselves, and that was the problem, because they were Hellenized Jews, or say the globalists in a way, to put it to modern terms, and then you have the traditionalists.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, there was a clash within the Jewish community as well. The Mityavnim, those people that were certainly in our rabbinic literature, they speak of about the Jews and the Yevanim. And we often translate the Yavanim as the Greeks, but I'm not sure that's the best translation. but I'm going to stick with convention. Really, it's a what are they?
Seleucid, yes.
Seleucids,
Like,
Greeks.
yeah.
Excellent. So the Shem Shmuel explains what was the point of conflict. What was where was the ideological clash between them? So we, the Jews, were very much into mitzvot ma'asiyot. This is what you need to do. We were into action. And they, the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks, they disagreed and they said, you don't need to do certain things in order to find favor in God. The greatest person is not the person who does good, but is the greatest mind. You follow? So we, the Jews, are the most important feature of our humanity, meaning the mark of a great person is not their mind, but it's in their actions. It's what they do. What makes a good person is somebody who performs, behaves in the right way, ethically, and uprighting. We have many mitzvot, and somebody who does the right thing is a great person. And they say, no, you can do whatever you like. What makes a great person is the greatest mind. You follow? So we were admiring a saint, and they were admiring a genius. You follow? ובזה הוא מתדבק לשכל הפועל שהמציאו בדמיונם, כידוע מעניין הפילוסופים שהם חכמי יוון. Even today, the greatest philosophers are following that same sort of approach, not meaning the philosophy per se is not what he's objecting to, but this taking of philosophy and putting on a pedestal that the greatest person alive is the greatest philosopher. And we would say the greatest person alive is measured by not their ideas, but measured by what they do. After 120, HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't read my PhD. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will see what I did. That's really our approach. You follow? We are action-based rather than mind-based.
They have a concept of philosopher king. I think that's either Plato or Aristotle.
The what?
A philosopher king.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wasn't one of them taught Alexander the Great?
Yeah, I think that was Aristotle.
Excellent. Oh, you're such a gift. Okay. Al-Kain Lu'umat Nes HaNeirot. That's why, explains the Shem Shmuel, why is it that after seeing the miracle of the candles, the rabbis turned it into an action? Shehi mitzvah ba'asiyah levad. Meaning, how do I perform the mitzvah of Channukah? I perform the mitzvah of Channukah by doing something. And that is my, not proof, but that is my, I suppose it's, so if I want to contrast our victory, I pronounce my victory by doing something. Because then I'm contrasting myself with the life of the mind, but by becoming the action. So I'm taking that great miracle that occurred and turning it into an action. You follow? Now he says, Ki, ba'adam yesh machshava, dibur u'ma'asa. He says, in a person there are three parts. Do you see I did this little chart here? Machshava is thought, dibur is speech, ma'aseh action. ונבחר המעשה שהוא החלק הפחות שבאדם, שבמעשה הוא משתתף עם שאר בעלי חיים, ומותר האדם מן הבהמה עין, מפני שהוא מדבר, ויש לו שכל. So he says, in the Greek way of looking at the world, so an action is the lowest part of us. Why? Because in my walking, in my moving, my actions are that is the part of me that I have common with animals. Meaning, let's say when I run, so animals can run. When I walk, animals can walk. When I jump, animals can jump. So my action is the lowest form of behavior, because there I'm really on the equal playing field with the animals. Now, when I start speaking, so I'm elevating myself from the level of an animal because I'm speaking. Now, I know some animals communicate with each other, but I'm still, I'm sort of separating myself, especially intelligent speech. I'm elevating myself above the animals, and then when I get to independent thought, then I've reached it. Then I'm really way above animals. You follow? And therefore, the highest form of human activity is thought. That is the position of the Greeks. Is that clear? However, we say it differently. Mishum hachi, therefore, meaning but we look at the world differently. We don't look at our actions as parallel to the actions of an animal. Meaning, it's true that I run, but me running to shacharit can't be compared to an animal, I don't know, running to a banana or whatever it is. Meaning, it's true that I'm not my action is similar, but when I'm performing an action in the performance of a mitzvah, that isn't, I'm in no way parallel to the behavior of an animal, because my action is an elevated action. In fact, the greatness of human beings is our free choice allows us to choose our actions. So, if you would never see an ant behaving like a cat, or you never see a kangaroo behaving like a giraffe, because their actions are all pre-programmed. But my actions are the opposite, meaning for the Jewish approach, it's the opposite. I start with a thought, and the thought leads me to speech. But then when I take that thought to speech, my action is the most elevated thing that I can do, because it is taking that natural ability, but giving to it some depth, giving it meaning, giving it purpose. So my actions may be the same physical, like lifting an arm, or or doing whatever action it is, but a human action, helping somebody cross the road, carrying shopping for somebody, the mitzvot that we do, playing an instrument. Well, whatever the actions that I do are refined, holy actions, because they're coming with the perspective of a thought to speech to action. So according to the Shem Shmuel, the approach of people, the approach to life could not be more different. For the Greeks, the lowest thing I can do is an action, and then I move up to speech, and then the highest thing is thought. For us Jews, I start with my thought, and then I turn that into speech. Then I'm taking control of myself. I'm empowering myself. I'm not an animal. And then I'm turning that into an action. And that's the highest type of action. So I have self-control. I am refined. I, as an observant Jew, can love ice cream, and I can walk past the ice cream parlor after eating a burger, because I know it's God's will that I wait between eating meat and milk. And that action is the action of a refined soul, and there's nothing greater in this world than the action of performing a mitzvah. You follow? Meaning the refined action of an ethical individual is the greatest way to to live our lives. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I had similar to what you were saying. I don't know if it's really related to what you were saying, but there is a concept, I think, in Torah of speech into action, and I think it's the word davar, and there is also such thing in the creation of the world.
Ah, you're right. You mean like Vayomer Hashem, like Hashem spoke and then He created.
Yeah.
Like Hashem created the world through speech.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it goes further, like it develops such concept, but I don't know if it's related this. I was thinking it through.
Yeah, that's very
but
interesting.
I couldn't completely connect it to what you were saying. There's a
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is something like a. Yeah, I'm forgetting the quote now. Anyway, but you're quite right.
Because that's why I didn't want to say it because I didn't have it.
No, but you're quite right.
Yeah.
That there is that like Hashem brought the world into being through speech. What we're saying now is that the philosophy that we are fighting against could not be more different to ours. The greatest human is the refined human being who acts with purpose and with meaning. You follow? An action, a refined action, is the greatest human activity. You follow? Okay, so that's. But you understand that for the Greeks, like an action is, I'm an animal. You know, I'm hungry. I'm going to eat. I'm tired. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to, But in terms of behaving as a human being with dignity and with purpose, that is the greatest person, and that's really the contrast. I know I'm not an expert in Greek philosophy, but the private lives. There's always terrible stories of the private lives of some of the greatest minds, and I can understand if it's all about my mind, so then the way I behave wouldn't be as relevant. But for us, the most refined person is all about how you behave. That is the greatest thing. Now, with this, we now understand our little halacha. Umishum hachi nami kavta ein zakuk la. Once it's blown out, you don't need to relight it. Why? He wants to tell us that the most important thing about Channukah lights is your action. You follow? I think it's such a brilliant idea. I mean, you probably figured that out by now, right? Meaning the only thing that matters on Channukah is, did you light it? Why? Because the only thing that is important is your action. The fact that it remains lit afterwards isn't the important point. The point is, in our battle against this culture, this foreign culture, is to tell us that the most important thing is what you do. And therefore, all that the rabbis were interested in is, what did you do? You lit it? Perfect, you're off the hook. You hear that? I'm just going to finish it because he writes just too beautifully. The fact that it remains lit afterwards is really of no consequence because that's not what's important to you. Al-Kain, he explains, Hadlaka levad oseh mitzvah. I achieved the full Channukah merit just through the action of lighting. Shelo tiknu ela ha'ma'aseh b'po'al. Hefech machshavat ha'yevanim. The rabbis wanted to contrast the Greek culture specifically in this mitzvah. To call inyan hadlaka oseh mitzvah hu mishum shelo tiknu ela ha'ma'aseh b'po'al lehorot al inyana shu hefech machshavat ha'yevanim umishum haitam and gufa kavta ein zakuk la. That's why once it's gone out, you don't have to relight it. Is that clear to everybody? Comments, thoughts, any ideas, any havrakot on what we just said?
Well, the one that I don't know how much it connects to all this, but of what you were saying previously, extension of is words into actions, is concept of word is my bond. I don't know if it can relate. As you were saying, the word is only giving weight or substance when you follow through with your action. So the word is my bond, and like your words are becoming empty unless you follow through with the action.
יפה מאוד, יפה מאוד.
You have to have weight to it. I don't know, just that.
Yeah, that's the truth. When you were speaking, you remind me of there's a very, very interesting halacha. There's a book called the Sefer HaChinuch that is, I think, somewhere over here. Anyway, there is a mitzvah in the Sefer HaChinuch quite early on, like mitzvah number 15 or 16, I can't remember exactly which one. There is a mitzvah concerning Pesach, that when you eat the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to break any of the bones of the Korban Pesach. So the result is that when you eat the Korban Pesach, you have to eat it very carefully. You know, it's not like a free-for-all, everyone's jumping over it and then it all gets, you know, like there's like a couple of bits of bones left over. It had to be a very dignified affair, eating the Korban Pesach, because it's very fragile to make sure you carve the meat off the Korban in a way that would make sure that no bones were broken. So in the Sefer Chinuch, in discussing this mitzvah, why the Sefer Mitzvah, the Sefer Chinuch goes through every mitzvah in the Torah and explains what he believes is the reason for each one of those mitzvot. So concerning this particular mitzvah, he has a lovely phrase, and the phrase is Acharei pu'ulot nimshachim halevavot. That it's a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy. That acharei ma'asim nimshachim halevavot. That my thoughts are triggered by my actions. So if I'm forced to act in a gentle manner when I cut up the korban, the result is I'm going to eat it in a calmer fashion. And he says, rather than telling us, eat calmly, the mitzvah is you're not allowed to break any bones, and the result is that I'm going to, it's going to have an impact on the way, I'm going to eat in a calmer manner. But the idea is really a bit like what you were saying, that
It's also funny because that's for Sefer Chinuch and Chinuch and
Chanukah.
Channukah.
Yafeh Ma'od. Excellent. Yeah. Very, very good. Okay, but it's sort of like this relation between action and thought, and how like my thought leads to my action, but then a refined action can impact my thoughts after, sort of like it's a cycle. But this particular mitzvah has this unique feature, and the reason for the unique feature is to contrast the Jewish approach to life as opposed to the culture that they were fighting against. Okay, that's one approach. That's from the Shem Shmuel. The second approach is from another book called the Bnei Saschar. Bnei Saschar is about a generation or two earlier than the Shem Shmuel, maybe even 3 generations earlier. I think the Bnei Saschar, I think his name was Rav Yaakov Yosef. He's called Bnei Saschar because his Rebbe, his Hasidic teacher, felt that he was a descendant of the tribe of Yisachar. So as respect to his teacher, he called his book Bnei Saschar because that's who he felt he was. Many books of Hasidut are based on teachings that the rabbi would give on his weekly tish with his students. But the Bnei Saschar it's not on a weekly schedule, it's on a monthly schedule. So he has 12 sections, and on the section on Kislev, obviously he talks about Channukah, and he speaks about our question of Kavta Ein Zakuk La, and he gives a different answer. So let's look at the Bnei Saschar. He says, why is it that if the light goes out, you don't need to relight it? L'ramez, to hint to us, Shekain hu ma'alat eisek haTorah, afilu lo kivenet halacha laha'ir, sheyilchu rabim lo'oro, ein zakuk la, v'yesh lo sachar kamo ha'me'ir la'aretz v'ledarim kedat v'chahalacha, v'yushlam al yedei osko b'chokhmat haTorah or nafsho. Okay, he's also contrasting the Jewish approach to the Greek approach, but in a different way. We have a very important principle that appears in Pirkei Avot and elsewhere as well, Lefum Tsa'ara Agra, which means, according to the effort, so too is the reward. We are much more interested in the process than we are in the result. So let's say, I don't know if any of you have ever learned Gemara, but I'll just give you an example. Let's say you're studying and you spend, 2 hours trying to understand the meaning of a phrase in the Talmud, discussing it with your chavruta, and you go this way and that way, and you're having this huge, beautiful discussion. And then after 2 hours of discussion, you have a class on that piece, and you realize that, that you were wrong. So is there any value to that 2 hours? Did you waste 2 hours? So in every other discipline, you would say yes, right? But in Torah, we don't say that. Why? Because our focus is not on the result, but our focus is on the process. Now, what did you do? If you were doing the right thing, then it can't be bad. You follow? As long as you were involved in the process, but and it didn't work out, that doesn't matter. You're rewarded for the effort, not for your results, which obviously is in contrast to general Western thought. This Greek community from which we were fighting against was all about results. Who's the strongest, who's the best at this, best at that. But the value of just being part of the process is something that contrasts our approach to theirs. So the same idea, but in a different context. So the Bnei Yissaschar says, let's say I light my Channukah candles, and then the Channukah candles go out and say, oh, bother. I've done, what's the point? There's no Chanukah candles. So the Bnei Yissaschar says, no, hafuch, opposite. I want to tell you that there's a value. You did what you need to do. Perfect. That's all you needed to do. You follow? Don't worry about, is it lit now? The only question is, did I do the right thing? You follow? If I did the right thing, that is the only thing that matters in my Chanukah lighting experience. You follow? Okay, but I want to continue because he's got a very, very clever twist at the end. Okay, even if it doesn't stay lit, your reward for the mitzvah is the same as the reward of somebody for whom it remained lit the whole time. You follow? 1 second, I'm just going to jump a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go in the fourth line down. Why is that the case? Kevan, because kavanat ha'adam ba'osko ba'torah l'shem shamayim. If I am involved in Torah for the sake of heaven, lo yachush afilu yit'eh l'sha'a kala Hashem yitbarach yinchehu b'ma'aglei tzedek. If somebody is involved in Torah study, l'shem shamayim, even if you make a mistake, God would considers your Torah involvement as somebody else who reached a different conclusion to the one that you reached. Why? Because it's the process that is important rather than the result. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, now look at this. This is a really, really clever thing at the end. So everyone remember, I just want to tell you something very quick about Jewish history. I'm going to explain what. Then we'll see something absolutely brilliant. The Channukah story happened during the Second Temple period. Now, as you know, probably one of the most important transitions of Jewish history occurred during the Second Temple period. The transition from prophecy to Rabbanim, from like a Chazal. We start off with the books of Zechariah, Malachi, Ezra, Nehemiah. We start the Second Temple period in the Tanakh, and we finish the Second Temple period in the Mishnah. So we make the transition from Tanakh to Mishnah in this period, and right bang in the middle of that transition is the story of Channukah. The Bnei Yissaschar explains what happened. Explains absolutely brilliantly about how that transition occurred. What's the difference between the time of Tanakh and the time of Mishnah? I mean, there are lots of ways you could explain what Tanakh is and what Mishnah is. But in Tanakh, we're reading the Word of God. Nachon, there's no one that will debate, is it correct, is it not? This is the Word of God, or God through prophets, but it's Davar Hashem. When it's one of our holy books. The Mishnah, on the other hand, they're trying to figure out, but it's full of arguments. This rabbi says it's this way, that rabbi says it's that way. You don't hear an argument in the Tanakh there's no debate about what God is saying. I'm not making that quite. There's not different. I mean, there are different ways of reading it, but it's a different type of text. You follow? I want to understand it, but here maybe I would put it differently. This is a text, the Tanakh, but the Mishnah is not a text. The Mishnah is an experience. I'm entering into a discussion. Like this is monologue isn't the right word, but it's a text from a text to a discussion, and that transition to a discussion, which is really Mishnah, Gemara, and even us learning now is continuing in a holy tradition of discussion. That Channukah is part of that transition. Why? So look at this. It's the last 4 lines. Nirali. It appears to me. Ba'avur zeh achar shlitat malchut Yavan. After we overcame this enemy, the Greek culture, nitrabu hamachloket v'plugtot b'halachot, says after we defeated them and we focused on the process rather than the result, arguments increased within the Jewish people. And that's what created the Mishnah. And that's what created the Talmud and the debates. Why? Because we became more focused on being involved in the discussion than being right. You follow? So the rabbis would say, let's say in the Greek world, either you're right or you're wrong. But in our tradition, it's about the process. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And then you open up this Beit Midrash in which all these different voices started to speak. And each of those voices was a legitimate voice. And it's not irrelevant to the discussion who's right, because at the end we have to rule halakha, but each person involved in the discussion is equally part of the transition of Torah from generation to the next generation. Why? Because it's the discussion that counts, the discussion that counts much more than who's right. You follow? And that idea of be part of the discussion rather than be right is part of the difference between our culture and their culture. So therefore it's the same idea. Once you lit it, you've done everything you want to. You did your bit. I'm not interested in the result. Is it lit or is it not lit? Did you do your bit? Were you part of the discussion? Great. You're now off the hook. You understand? And therefore, kavta in zakukla, because the result isn't the point. The result is to be in the sugya, like to be part of the discussion. Isn't that brilliant? I'm just going to read the last few lines because that's what he was saying. Me'et Hashem haitazot, this was God's will, l'horot, to teach us, ma ben chokhmat haTorah lechokhmot hachitzoniot for philosophia hayevanit. What's the difference between Torah study and these other areas of intellectual discussion? HaTorah, in Torah, kol hahogeba, anyone who is involved in Torah, v'osek ba, and is it, our goal is, are you involved in Torah study? Afilu lo kivenet halacha, even if you didn't get it right, Yirutzeh lefnei Hashem, that is part of the Torah discussion. All they're interested in the Jewish let's say the Greek academies, they want to find out what's right. But in our Batei Midrash, we'll say, everyone just come in and say something. Be part of the discussion. You follow? And that world view is exemplified by this mitzvah of the Channukah. Isn't that brilliant? Okay, I want to summarize, and then we'll move on. We saw 2 positions on this beautiful question of if the Channukah goes out, you don't have to relight it. Why? So the first, the Shemesh Shmuel, who says the most important thing is action. A refined actor is what is a good Jew. The highest level of human activity is to be a refined member of society. You follow? And then I go from thought, speech, and then the highest thing is an action. You did the right action, you're done. And then according to the Bnei Soscha, according to why is it if it went out? I don't have to relight it, because all I'm interested in is, are you in the sugya? I'm not interested in the result, I'm interested in the process. Did you do the right thing? Were you part of the process? Are you in the discussion? Are you sitting in the Beit Midrash? Are you in Machon Meir? If you're in the right place, that's the most important thing. We're not interested in like the one person who figures out figures out the truth. We're much more interested in having a whole community involved in the discussion. That's what distinguishes Torah study from every other type of study. So I want to bless us all, Be'ezurat Hashem, this year when we light our Channukah lights. First of all, they shouldn't go out. But if they do go out, then we should remember two things. First of all, that I did the right thing. It doesn't matter. Who cares? I did the right thing. Why? Because I behaved as a human being. I did the right action. And because I'm in the sugya. And if I'm in the sugya, that's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of me. Yishar koach lachem. Channukah sameach.